Hello, my name is Tonye Faloughi-Ekezie, and I'm the founder of Simone's Oasis. And we're here in Nigeria, and we use the power of storytelling, creative arts, and tech to raise awareness about Down syndrome, autism, and other special needs. We are doing so to champion the rights of children with disabilities here in Nigeria and around the world. So I guess let me tell you a little bit about myself. Before I got into the advocacy space, I never knew this was something I was going to do. I was actually quite a successful TV and film producer here in Nigeria, Ghana, and South Africa. And then life happened. I met my wonderful husband, who's also my best friend. We got married and we had 2 children. Now, this is where life changed, specifically with my second child, Simone, my girl. She was diagnosed at 4.5 months with Down syndrome. And that was quite a late diagnosis. She didn't present any of the markers. She didn't look like she had the features. But at 4.5 months, she was diagnosed with Down syndrome. Now, what happens pretty much soon after a diagnosis of Down syndrome is that because 40 to 60% of babies with the diagnosis have some form of congenital heart defect. So at 5 months, she went for an echo. And unfortunately, she was diagnosed with heart failure. And that completely changed our lives because she was given only 6 months to live. So our life became a whirlwind, hopped on a plane to the US. And at 6 months, she had open heart surgery, which was life-saving. However, she didn't recover as fast as they expected. Usually it's a recovery of about 3 months. Hers took 2.5 years. So in that 2.5 years, I was fighting for her life. I was fighting to learn everything I could about how to get her well, how to help her. And as her heart became better, I was able to focus more on the Down syndrome and learn about therapies and implement therapies to help her with her skills as she developed as a baby. So thank God, I always say that Simone is our little angel from God, but 2.5 years of fighting and struggle were over, and her and I could return to Nigeria and unite with my husband and my son, her older brother, after 2.5 years of being apart. Now, you would think that I would be happy, but it was the complete opposite. I was lost. The kids settled in and settled back, and Simone was in her groove and they were happy. Everything was great. My husband was happy, but I was lost. I was down. I was depressed. And I couldn't figure it out. I realized that for 2.5, 3 years, I had put everything of myself into making sure Simone made it. Suddenly, she was better. Suddenly, we're reunited as a family, and I didn't know my place anymore. It was like I had nothing to focus on, nothing to fight for. And my husband just told me this. He said, Tonye, you've been holding everything for the past 3 years. You've been carrying everything, all the burden. Let go. Stop, wait, and listen for God to talk to you. And that's extremely difficult because I'm a very hyperactive person. And it's difficult for me to kind of sit still. But I had to, in order to find my direction. And then one day it happened. My son came up to me. I was sitting in my home office, which is in an open space. And he came up to me and he said, "Mummy," and he's a very old man. He's like an old man, in fact. And he goes, "Mummy, I'm very angry with you." And I said, "Why are you angry with me? What have I done?" He goes, "It's not fair what's happening. Every day, these people come to play with Simone after school, and nobody allows me to join them." And then I realized what he meant. And I explained to him that those people that came every day to work or play, as he thought, with his sister were actually therapists, because his sister has something called Down syndrome. Now, I realized at the time he was about four and a half years old. And so immediately he said, "What's Down syndrome, Mommy?" And I started to explain to him that Down syndrome was an extra copy of chromosome 21. Then he was like, "Mommy, what's a chromosome?" Or chromosome. You couldn't even say chromosome, say chromosome. And I was like, oh gosh, how am I going to explain this? Okay, chromosomes are like the houses that store the building blocks of our genes. What are genes? And anyway, I did a terrible, terrible, terrible job. Now, children are extremely visual. So I thought, okay, we are a reading household, we're a book household. Why don't I find some books that are appropriate for his age that explain Down syndrome? And I thought this was going to be so easy. I thought, yeah, I think at the time it was 2019. This is great. We're in 2019. We should be able to find something appropriate for our family. And boy, was I disappointed. Horribly disappointed, because I found no books that represented us at all. There was nothing. Even forget the Nigerian family or Nigerian characters, or even African characters, African family. There was nothing with a Black character with Down syndrome, nothing with a Black family that featured our situation. So all I found were books that had Caucasian characters, and they were decent. There was a couple that were actually quite good, but then they were only one story. You couldn't grow and continue with the character, which I found so disappointing. And so we just managed. I got a few books, we went through it, and he began to understand the concept of his sister's diagnosis. Then one day it kind of happened. I was watching Ugo and Simone play together. And Simone was struggling with a toy. She was struggling with, fixing the parts of a toy. And Ugo immediately stepped in and helped her, and they were playing together. And a light bulb just went off in my head. And I'm like, they're the story. Let me write the story for them. So I went to my home office and I began to write the story, Ugo and Sim Sim, What is Down syndrome? And it literally was just a fictionalized version of the conversation me and my son had. And I cannot draw a stick figure. I cannot draw anything. I'm terrible at drawing. It's like a running joke in our household. So I thought, okay, let me find some illustrators. And I found some illustrators, and we did this book together. Amazing illustrations. We designed everything. And then I took it to just one local printing shop, printed it, 4 copies, 2 for each of the kids, because kids tear books, they dribble on books, they do everything with books. And so they got 2 copies each, and they were ecstatic. They were so excited to see themselves, and they devoured the books. Job done, right? At least that was what I thought. But then one day, a friend of mine came over, because I had found out through my sister that she has a son with Down syndrome, and I never knew. So she came over, and we had a visit, and we had a good cry, and we caught up, and my son brought his book, his copy of Ugo and Sim Sim, and showed her. And he was so proud, and she devoured the book. but didn't stop there. She said to me, Tonye, you have to do something with this. Families like mine, we need this. I mean, it could be an amazing point of reference for children, for families. You cannot keep this to yourself. It's not fair. And so I took that advice to heart. I know nothing about publishing then. So I thought, okay, let me send what I've done to some publishers here in Nigeria. And it was hard to stomach. I got rejected, 100% rejection. And not just rejection, really vicious rejection. Publishers told me that no parent would buy such a book for their child. No one wants to know about special needs. There isn't place for this in books for Nigeria. There's no market for this. Anything they could say, they turned me down with hate. But I was convinced. I was convinced that there was a place. And so I went into self-publishing. And that was a steep learning curve. Very, very steep learning curve. But I did it. I knew that Ugo and Sim Sim stories were important. I knew that families like mine, like my friends, would love to see this representation and would also help them navigate this difficult terrain. And so I did it. I printed 5,000 copies and I began to do the legwork for distribution. And again, I hit vicious rejection. You see, in Nigeria, special needs, disabilities can be looked on as a curse or something that you're experiencing because you sinned. Your village people have cursed you, that you did something wrong during your pregnancy, that you've sinned, and that it's not something you should talk openly about. In fact, it's something that you should hide. It's something that you should be ashamed of. But I never felt that way. I never felt that way about my daughter. For me, it's a privilege to be her mother. It's not a burden. It's a privilege. And I wear being her mother as a badge of honor. So I disagreed wholeheartedly with this attitude and do to this day. You know, even for example, I've had pastors come up to me and say I should send my daughter to them so that they can remove the Down syndrome. So this is really what we're dealing with. And so I understand the importance of the storytelling using Ugo and Sim Sim to change perceptions about Down syndrome and other disabilities, other special needs. So in going to distribute, right, I've printed 5,000 books. I need somewhere to put them. So I started to go to retail outlets, distributors, bookstores to take my book for sale. And again, I got not 100% rejection, maybe like 96% rejection for the same reasons. Their customers wouldn't be interested in such a story, and no one would purchase this for their child. No one would want to introduce their child to this kind of stories and content because it's not something that is openly talked about. Those stores that did take my book, I put them in, and then I just started going around schools, promoting my books on social media, selling them myself, and I've sold 5,000 copies of my books on my own. And now I'm happy to say I have a publisher and we're working on a new books for the series. So it's really important to understand how much representation matters. It is really important for children growing up. It's even important for us as adults because seeing ourselves represented is so powerful and so positive. And because I knew from my experience going through this the hard way, how important stories are, because of the reactions I got from Ugo and Sim Sim, and the fact that I was able on my own to sell 5,000 copies, that there is a value and there are more stories to be told. And so I formed Simone's Oasis specifically for this reason, in using creative arts, storytelling in different mediums. So we have animated music videos, music, podcasts. We're doing a documentary right now, because there's so much power in storytelling in all its forms, to advocate, to raise awareness. If people are thinking that Down syndrome is a sin, a curse, I know it's not. We know it's not. But how do we change people's mindsets? How do we change people's perceptions? And the best way to do that is through stories. Now, our primary target market is children. And why children? Well, because children are open. They're curious. They can pick up and learn so fast, and then they become the best advocates. They pay it forward. They talk about it. They share these stories with their friends. So at Simone's Oasis, our primary target market are children. And that's because children are open. Their brains are still developing. Their minds are still developing. And it's a great time to introduce them to the uniqueness of individuals. And then they take it on board. They carry it forward. They become welcoming to other children who are unique, who are different, whatever their ability or disability. Now, children don't raise themselves, right? There's a parent or caregiver around. And therefore, by default, that's our secondary target market. I often say parents are the problem. So it's great that children actually help change the mindsets of our parents. And parents, because often they're the times reading with their children, they are also learning, and they discover about Down syndrome, special needs, how to look and treat people who are different from our stories. So it's a real blessing to do this with children, because children are really our best ambassadors. Now, it's gone even further than, say, families in their home. Now, schools are using some of our content. For example, we have this awesome music video called Nigeria 36 States, and that's teaching kids the 36 states of Nigeria. And loads of schools in Nigeria are using this to teach their students, but it's also opening the door to a conversation about the characters. And from the video, from the fun, they now can organically kind of introduce discord about Down syndrome, disabilities, people who are different in the classroom. Why is this important? This is really, really important because we're mainstreaming this content for kids. We're mainstreaming this topic. It's not something niche. It's not something hidden. It's not something to be ashamed of. And through stories, through entertainment, edutainment, as I like to say, we are able to do the work in a very digestible, fun way. You see, because we have something called the AAAs, which is our agenda, essentially. And the AAAs, the idea or concept of it was formed by Mrs. Osezuzi Boladeoku, and she's the founder of FOSS ABA Center here in Nigeria. In fact, my daughter Simone is their ambassador, and that's where she receives her therapy. Now, the triple A's and why we do what we do in storytelling and creating content is for this. The triple A's are awareness, acceptance, and accommodation. Because how can we ask people to come on board, be with us, advocate with us, or treat our children just like anybody else if they've never seen somebody with Down syndrome, or they've never encountered somebody with autism? So first of all, they have to see it. They have to be aware. They have to know. From that knowing comes understanding and acceptance. And so they will then accept children like my daughter. From acceptance, it's not just having them there in our presence, right? The third thing that comes is accommodation. We make space, we integrate, we include. They become part of us, 100%, and not just something that's an afterthought. So that's really our mission, is the triple A's. So it's really, really important that there's a place for stories like Ugo and Sim Sim in society, because sometimes we don't always have the words to explain something. But if the stories exist, then all you have to do is refer people to the stories. You know, I say, okay, my daughter has Down syndrome, and the parent might not know how to explain what it is, but they can say, hey, you know, we've got this amazing book. Here it is, read it. And that will help other people understand the diagnosis of the child, the children, of yourself, if you're someone with a diagnosis, and it helps fill in that gap of understanding and explanation to the outside world. Mainstreaming this content is really important, and we can actually take a leaf from the LGBTQ plus community. It's whether you agree with what they're doing or not, how they have gone about promoting their values, promoting their place in society, has been through mainstream media. We need to take a page from their book. Just look at Netflix, for example. There's 3 series I absolutely love that do this job very well. The Good Doctor, Love on the Spectrum, and my personal favorite, Down for Love. Whenever people ask me about Down syndrome, I send them straight there. And I just say, just watch it. Especially if they're asking me about, oh, what happens to them when they grow up? What will they do? What will they be able to achieve? And I just send them to Down for Love. I give them my book, or I tell them where to purchase my books. And that does the consciousness raising work in a way that's easily digestible for people who are not living this life, right? But may be curious, who may want to support. You see, it's really important that we get the wider society understanding that children like my daughter are more than an afterthought. They need to be included. And that's why it's really important that the storytelling that we do is aimed at children, because these children will grow. These children will decide what will happen in society. And because they have been taught to include everyone, they will not only make decisions that are important for people with disabilities. No. They will be seated at the table with people like my daughter, and my daughter will have her own voice and make decisions for herself. So she will speak for herself. Children like her will grow up and speak for themselves, and they will be full functioning members of society, giving back, fulfilling their roles and responsibilities like everyone else. So this is really what the power of storytelling can do. Are you ready to tell your own story?